Hey everyone, welcome to this making of video about If Found, the video game that we've been working on for years. If Found came out last year in 2020. It's kind of like a 1 year kind of since. So it's really cool to be part of the festival, and it's like a chance to go back and to dive deep into all the bits and pieces and to reminisce. So I'm Llaura McGee. I was the director on the game, and I'm joined by Eve. Hello, Eve.
Hello.
We're both in Dublin, but separated by time and space. Well, not time, just space. um, so yeah, this is a talk that I put together last month, but I'm gonna do it over for public consumption, and I'm going to. This is me. I'm gonna give it with Eve, so I'm not just talking to myself. I'm gonna have a little buddy. Here's Cassio and Jack just enjoying like the lovely view. This is such a good shot of like Ackle. I think this is like literally like Dua or something by Leah.
It's so nice.
And it just feels so cozy. Look at the little slippers and
Yeah.
everything. It's really nice.
The colors are stunning too. Like that.
Yeah, nice pastels.
Yeah.
So yeah, like if you haven't played the game, like there will be like some slight spoilers, but mostly we're gonna go into like things we learned during development, issues that came up. So I think like it's a good reason to go play the game, and if you've played it, it's like hopefully this half an hour is like a nice reason to return as well. Specifically, I was asked to give a talk about Iffan's journey. So here is a map that will display Iffan's journey all the way from Donegal, where I'm from. This is like a lovely shot of Fintra Beach in Donegal. You can probably, I think my house is like way back here in the distance, but don't stalk me. No, you can't see it. It's somewhere in here. It's like a lovely, lovely, lovely small place. But I'm from this small town in Donegal on the west coast. And then the journey of Ifan went from there all the way to there, which is tiny, to Ackle, which is another lovely place in the west coast. This is Keem Bay, where a lot of things take place in the game. Here is Shant's on Keem Bay, for example, with more art by Leah, nice pastels. In reality, the journey was more like this. So, over to the UK and all around and back and over to the States. So it's a very circuitous route. What is Ifine? This is the question how do I describe it? And I was like, I'll put it into Google, and here's all the results. Here's like the little trailer, which you can also see on the Steam page. It's a game with lots of purples. I think you can see that, like the background behind me, the background behind Eve, lots of purples. But yeah, we really like going for really impressionistic and like strong colors. The game itself is a game where you are raising. That's the kind of central mechanic, and you are playing as Cassio, a young woman who is kind of reading back over her diary and erasing all these painful moments. But she goes on a journey, as you will see. That is not the end of the story, thankfully. This is the team. Eve in the middle, myself beside her. Alexandra, our social queen. Brianna Chu, they were our second artist. I'll talk about some of the bits and pieces they did. They really helped us out. Leah Young, who was our lead artist. Tim, our lead coder. Then we have Brogan, who helped with design and everything. Matt and Ellie, who both did sound and music. So in this little chat, the main 3 points that I want to build on is the mechanic of erasing, where it came from, the history of it, how it was developed, building the studio, how this whole thing started from me and Leah, and me myself before that, how that became the Dreamfield team we have now. And then I also want to talk about what I learned about story structure, i.e. making a good game, hopefully. Here's like a lovely piece of art, another lovely piece of art by Leah from the ending. This is some of those extra pieces that we got to do for like the big patch and Switch version that came out in October last year. And we added these drawings to the ending, which I'll talk about a little bit. So, where we start, this is a long journey, so we're going to go back to 2011. 10 years, that's wild. The outside existed in 2011 from what I hear. I started, so I moved to Scotland. So from Ireland, from moving to Dublin, I went to Scotland because at that time there was so much more of a game scene in Scotland. I did a master's over there and then started working for companies over there. One of the things I designed during my master's was this little prototype actually, where if you can't draw, this is like a tip for programmers, you can make art with spheres. So this is a little game called Fuim, which means a sound, and you control a little ball, and you could run around the planets, and you could jump from planet to planet. So it was kind of like a Mario Galaxy in 2D kind of thing. But the really cool trick, so this was a class where I had to learn DirectX, which is kind of like a graphics library for like Windows, and I had to code in DirectX. And probably like, you know, my go-to thing is like, while I couldn't wire them with the technical chops, DirectX is so mucky, and I'm not a graphics programmer. I could like come up with something kind of like nifty and not before seen. So I come up with this idea where you could have two parallel kind of pieces of art and one would erase into the other. So you'll see it here in a second. So yeah, here you can see there's this white foreground and then this like background here. And then there's no actual art. It's just like every you see art, it's like a stencil. It cuts through. This is like a much cleaner version of the same. And so it was a really neat trick. It created like really nice kind of confusing graphics. And I used it for like, in a few things. Like there was this game that I was working on for probably half a year, which was a platformer where you saved characters and you ran hand in hand. And they were being chased by this horrible storm. And with that storm, it was created out of that same stencil effect. And so that's where the erasing mechanic came from. At this point, it was only ever being used for one layer. And it wasn't quite erasing yet. It was just like, oh, it's a weird visual trick. So the other part of this poll. So yeah, these three things I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about them in order. I'm going to talk off them at each step because they all developed throughout. So on the game structure side, I'm now making games for a couple years. You know, I've been using X and A. I started using Flash, all these things. But all my games were terrible. They were so bad. Like often, like Foom, I would have a cool mechanic or a cool like graphical thing, but it would never really add into anything greater than the sum of its parts. So this was something I was still struggling with. How to make a game that felt like you wanted to keep playing and it felt like it actually goes somewhere. At the same time, I got really kind of burnt out working in Scotland. And I even became like a bit disillusioned, I'd say, with working in teams. I was like, oh, if you want to make like really important like personal work, it is not possible to do that in a team, you know? Like whether that's because it's hard to communicate or also maybe even more importantly, it's like, how do you get money to make personal cool games, you know? So those were definitely, that was definitely a big challenge. So I came back to Ireland and the next step, so it was kind of like my solo career. So between 2013 rather, in 2015 was when I was kind of freelancing. I was, still going to lots of like indie games events, especially like in the UK and in Europe, such as like TIG Jam, which was like from TIG Source, where lots of like TIG Jam UK specifically, where lots of UK game makers would meet up. And Feral Vector, which was called A Bit of Alright at the time, and Amaze. And so there were these places where people were making experimental small games and like sharing lots of ideas. And then the opposite end of the spectrum of that was something like GDC, which is where the AAA industry and the indie industry, I mean, probably that's what you'd call it actually, was kind of like crashing together a little bit. So you'd have like the big companies and then you'd have like the little indies making them seem a bit cooler. What are your thoughts on GDC, Eve?
I've never been. I'd like to go at some point, just to have the experience. Yeah. Although it feels weird to think about going to like a huge conference like that now, in the world of 2021. It's like, I know.
I stopped going to things for a while because I did want to wait until the fund was done and then I'd go to things. I think I'd probably lean towards going to some of the smaller festivals than GDC, just because it's such a big journey, you know. This was, you know, I was in a lucky position where I was able to go from Ireland the whole way across to, like, GDC or something. Like, a couple times I got scholarships that help with travel and accommodation and stuff like that. But, you know, that isn't something that's accessible to most small, especially queer indie developers, you know. So there's always this dichotomy where, you know, you'd have experimental, like, game creators, you know, like, often trans, and they'd be making all this, like, cool work, and then you'd have, like, a AAA studio being like, oh, that's so inspiring, making lots more money than the small person who just couldn't make a living at it. So I was kind of, and I was also teaching at DIT was, you know, probably, like, most of, like, my income and my stability. That's, like, it's not called TUD, but that was, I was getting the students to make small games and everything as well. But you can see my, like, desk in a little workspace. I'd, like, posters of my games, posters of, like, that's Liz Ryerson's art, which is really awesome. And here's some pictures of some of the games I made. This is one where you, like, sit inside a tent, and it rains on top of you. This is a picture of someone inside the tent. And when you're in there, there's, like, thunder and lightning, but you have, like, a little controller that will affect all the art. So just, like, playing around with, like, experimental little things. One game I think that I think was kind of a turning point, I think it's, like, a pretty good game, is Train Song. Have you played it, Eve?
Yeah, but it has been a few years.
I made this with Dave McCabe of Spooky Doorway fame, who's since, like, worked on Dark Side Detective, like, kind of Irish point and click games, which are very funny. He's a very funny writer. So with this, I was like, oh, I want to stop, you know, getting so bogged down with game mechanics, because they take a lot of effort, and I want to do something which is, like, as simple as possible. So it's essentially like a point and click game, or, like, even a point and walk. You're, like, a businessman on this, like, mystical train, and it's all made out of clay, and you're traveling through all these different worlds, and it's just full of, like, strange characters with strange stories. And it actually opens up with an FMV, which was fun. It's all stock footage.
Sorry. No, Did you do the art for Train Song?
It was, like, both of us, so...
it's really nice.
Yeah, like, it was fun. So I think I did the backgrounds and the carriages, and then half of the claymation characters. And then Dave made the main character, I'm pretty sure. I think he had it, like, hanging around, and did half of the other ones. There's a really good character at the end. Dave did, like, that big, huge, like, kind of, like, demon at the gates of hell kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was, like, a mixture. So, like, we spent, I think, a day on it, and then I kind of worked on it myself for, like, another, like, few weeks, basically. But that was very fun. And for me, it was kind of, like, this turning point where, you know, I started to realize that it wasn't just mechanics, but it was how you structure the mechanics, you know, and how you can use something very simple, you know, and I was playing games like with Academize and stuff, but, like, if you put that into a bigger structure, and part of that at the same time, I was going to, like, a writing group for experimental writers, run by Dave Lorden, and I think that was, like, probably, you know, one of the biggest things that affected I would say, like, the way that I write, you know, and I realized that if you can write a good story, and a good short story even, you can apply that same concept to video games, and the main concept here was, like, structure. So often, like, with structure, it gets bogged down in, like, what do you think of, like, Hero of 1,000 Faces and, like, the hero's journey kind of stuff?
I'm not a fan.
No, me neither.
I think there's people who've done, like, really good critiques of it, from a bunch of different angles. Like, it tends to kind of... It's not a bad description of some stories, but people do this thing where they get, like, really into it, and then they want to make every story fit it, which just isn't true.
Like, they try to make everything fit into it, which doesn't make sense. And the kind of fiction that we were writing in this course was, like, generally flash fiction, and in flash fiction, it's basically, you want to introduce an idea and then go somewhere with the idea, you know? Like, the most obvious way to see this is, like, a Twilight Zone twist, you know? And what I realized about this is that you are seeing something from multiple perspectives, so it's giving the idea depth, you know? And this not only applies to, like, stories. I could see how this could apply to games and even, like, parts of games, such as mechanics, you know? There's a very good video about how Super Mario 3D World actually uses, I'm gonna, like, probably not pronounce this very well, but Kosho Tenketsu to structure how it introduces a mechanic. So it will give you a mechanic in a fairly safe area where you can try it out. It will develop it, like the challenge will increase. It will provide a twist on the mechanic, so you'll see it in a different light, and then it'll give you one last chance to show you your mastery. And I think there's a game that doesn't also is very good at this. It's a very underrated indie game, actually, by Nifless, who made, like, Knit Stories and lots of ride games at the moment. But he made a game called Night Sky, and levels came in, like, packs of, I think, 3 or 4. And then the last level was always a lot easier than the previous one. It was kind of like a celebration, which was really neat. I started both combining this with writing, but also game design, and this kind of culminated in, first of all, a game/performance called the Infinite Notebook. So I'll just quickly show what this looks like. I'll speed it up loads. So here, like, I'm controlling, this was built in Unity, I'm controlling, like, moving the camera and it's spinning around. But then here is where it gets cool. I start zooming into the words. So here you can see it starts zooming in and zooming in and zooming in. So I combined this kind of zooming mechanic with this story that talked about a zooming mechanic in a sense, you know. And this was probably, like, the first thing I was really super proud of. I thought, like, this kills. It's so good. Like, at some point I'll get to, you know, parts of it find their way into If-Found, but then, you know, like, you'll see the zooming and we'll get to it later, but it's not really at the forefront, and I think there's potential for it at some point. But yeah, instead of really prescriptive story structures where it's, like, even, like, 5 acts or 3 acts and this happens and this happens and this happens, you can really just boil it down to, like, even something that works for, like, a joke, you know, the structure of a joke, which is, like, establishing something, you know, developing it, and then, like, a twist, an unexpected turn on it, which gives it all this extra depth. And then, you know, there's other, like, kind of very short ones. Another one I was thinking of recently was, like, I think it's the Brandon Sanderson's one, which is, like, promises, progress, and payoff, you know, which is very plot heavy, but also I think it can be applied to anything. So I was getting a lot of inspiration from these other worlds than just looking at video games at the time. And then also this kind of culminated in a side project. Curtain was originally supposed to take a weekend or something, and it was like a little break from my magnum opus or something, which was a very silly game, which is always the way. And it's actually really, really good. You know, there's a lot of, like, personal, there's a lot of strong feelings. You know, it's like, it's 6-7 years, so it's, like, easier to look back on it and not be so caught up in it. But in Curtain, which is, like, an experimental first-person game, so I was taking, you know, kind of, I was trying to, like, go somewhere new with games like walking sims, but also, like, just immersive sims in general, like Deus Ex, and before that, Ultima Underworld 2, where the story was always something that had happened in the past, and you're kind of uncovering it bit by bit by bit. And I really wanted a story that happened in the moment. And then another thing was, like, you know, using the weaknesses that I had, which was using them to my advantage. So I couldn't have a character on screen because it would look not very well. So instead, the character is represented by her text box, which never goes away. So her voice is always at you. Yeah, I think it has a nice structure. Like, the structure is paid off in these, like, different time zones, essentially. You see the apartment in the present day, the apartment maybe 6 months later, and then you see a final apartment where the main character is, you know, kind of living on her own again, and kind of, like, starting from scratch. And, you know, there's lots and lots to talk about in Curtain. You know, I wanted to make a game that was kind of like an anti-serious game of the time, you know, where they were always very neat and tidy and had very clean takeaways and also show how like the effects of trauma and all this like stuff can like linger with you. But ultimately, for the point of this talk, it was a critical, it was a critical success. It got written up by like websites. I won an Amaze Award, which was amazing. Like here is me, my cool jacket, and like probably one of the best like design words in the world. But this was like a total shock. I literally thought when they were reading out all the other words that they forgot to include Curtin. I wasn't going to make a fuss, and then Curtin won the overall thing, and it's like, what? And I think I gave a speech about how, it was just cool, for a small experimental game to win, and just like how important these small experimental games are to everything. This was kind of early alt game. We go through all these different waves of like alternative games, and they were called alt games at that point. But now I've made this. I didn't really get much money from it. The most money I got was like the prize money from Amaze. Releasing on Steam wasn't really on the cards. There was like kind of a different ecosystem. I don't think people were looking for this kind of game at the time. But yeah, how can I make a living at this? And I think this kind of speaks to the catch-22 a lot of experimental and queer and marginalized game developers find themselves in, which is like you can make cool work that like matters to you, but people with money are looking for things that already exist, but like with a fresh coat of paint. I don't know. What do you think, Eve? What are your thoughts on?
I think it's something that's very similar in a lot of different industries. It's just kind of like more in the games industry. It feels like all of the games industry is, similar to other artistic industries, except all of the capitalist parts are like ramped up.
So it's like, some like small number of companies will make a lot of money. But yeah, it's tricky. There has to be ways to support more developers. So I am doing my own solo stuff. I'm not going to make a team, but I kind of realized I can only do so much by myself, that I do need to start working with others, Curtin's art is perfect for what it is, but it is also not the most appealing, it is like a very intentionally like off-putting game, I think as you play the game, the art becomes, you kind of learn to like read it and see it, and like speaks to the themes, but it is not a pretty game. I think it is a really pretty game, but it's not a mass market game, and I was also getting kind of burnt out working solo, I will admit. So I kind of, at this point, I'd moved on from like kind of writing circles to like zines, and was making stuff like handmade. So, like, this is probably where I met you, Eve. You were in such circles. Well, actually, I met you before this, because I met you through, there was, like, a cool online event that Solani Stewart put together. What was that called?
Yeah. I do not remember what it was called.
It was like an online...
right at the height.
Was it, like, an online alternative to E3, or was that, like, a next thing that they did? But basically...
It was...
Getting experimental game makers together. But I saw that, like, okay, like, maybe I can give teams a shot again. And I met Leah. This is some of Leah's, like, old comics and stuff. Cool Boy Friday, like she was doing at the time. This was the first piece of art that I pitched her, basically a space western starring cats, two, like, space cat cowboys. And this was some art for a planet that they would visit that she did. I thought it was really cool. She came up with all these stories and stuff as well. Cool. Huh? It is neat.
It is really cool. Yeah.
But the main thing was, was working with her, honestly. We met up for like a one-day jam. We made a game called Lianne LaHavis Saves the Universe, which is about pop star Lianne LaHavis saving her dog, which actually reused the Gravity Planet mechanic a little bit. And that was quite a fun game. I mean, it was a fun time working with her, and we really, we really got along in a lot of same interests, and she was just, like, nice and chill, which was the main thing. And she started working with me, and I kind of realized that, oh, wow, yeah, you can have a supportive and nice environment, and you can create personal interest in games that are added to and transformed by other people, because I think it's harder, like, the bigger a team gets, to have a vision, like a clear identity maybe, but other people bring their own taste to things, their own flavor, and transform things into something you can't predict, which is just so cool.
Yeah.
A friend of mine helped me, so here's some of the stuff I was selling at the time. So you can see curtain, little poster, but I also had the games on CDs, which is just really nice. And then I had like some books of like stories and stuff as well. So with Leah, we started working on ideas, and the first thing that came to mind was to make a diary style game, because, I just wanted to like combine our loads of zines and comics and have something that felt really natural, and it just felt like a really personal touch that at that point it wasn't being seen at the time, I'd say. And this leads us to If Found.
Yeah, God, the early art for If Found is so good.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It's got real character, like. So here's If Found was originally called If Found, Please Return, which I'm very happy with that title. And Cassio and Cassiopeia were a single character who was basically an astronaut, maybe, but an Irish person who always wore a spacesuit, and also like would sometimes be in space. It was kind of unclear at this point, but we really like the image of this girl in a spacesuit. And here's like probably one of the first drawings of Chance, where like Cassio meets him at a bus stop, which you'll see shortly. And yeah, here's some screenshots from this first demo that we made. If Found really came together from the combination of the diary plus the erasing. We were working on a witch diary game, first of all, where different witches would talk to you through the diary, and you would also go to class or something, and each chapter was going to be based around a different spell. But I started to think that having a different spell for every chapter like could be a little tacky, where the mechanics were very on the nose and it was very obvious what we were trying to communicate. And once we came up with the erasing mechanic, I realized I could use that old tech that I have to not only erase like one layer, but if we could put things, like an accordion, like in loads of layers, you could erase. And once we put that, it's like, oh, this is so good. We should just make the whole game about erasing and the diary. We still have the zooming mechanic here at this point as well, which you'll see in a minute. So the zooming mechanic gave this kind of scale to things, so it felt like, okay, it has to be the end of the world. But the story was very different at this point. It was Cassio would go on dates with different characters, including Chance, and then at the end erase them because of it going badly. It was kind of like an anti-dating sim in a sense. And we'll talk about how that changed as we went on, but will we play this old version?
Yeah, let's.
Okay, let's check it out. So yeah, we brought it around Europe to a couple of different events. Like Eve, you came with me to London, which was really fun, and then we took it to a maze as well. Cool, so this is the original demo from 2016. Here you can see the cutout effect, and it is Cassio cutting out to some kind of weird trippy background and some particles. This is not the prettiest title screen, but it worked.
I do like it though.
Yeah, it's got nice colors. And I do like that font. We use that font for loads of things for ages. Moonflower. So, first biggest difference you want to see is if you hold down the right click button, you can drag and move the camera. And essentially the game still works like this, but we wanted to make it a bit more accessible, which you'll see later. So, and then here it tells you mouse wheel. It doesn't tell you what it does, but I think I was still of the opinion that, much like the opening of the game where it doesn't tell you to erase, like I think it's nice when you figure out the controls yourself. So it don't explicitly tell you the mouse wheel like zooms in, but I do tell you to use it. I can also use the buttons on the keyboard for a bit smoother. So here you can see our diary. This book belongs to Cassio. And actually this book belongs to, or at least this line actually is still the same. I think we had to replace this book belongs to because it had to be translated. There's also an effect here you can see, which is very distracting, though I do have a certain fondness for it, where everything gets kind of fuzzy on and off, like you're kind of fuzzing in and out. Ever since Curtain, I do like putting post-processing on things, just have everything kind of changing constantly. It's kind of pulsing. Here we do explicitly tell you how to control it. Well, we do say interact rather than erase, and it's okay, you can do it, keep going. Because once people would start doing this, they would get nervous and they wouldn't want to erase anymore. The 11th of October. I went to the bus stop this morning and met a guy called Mac. It rained. And then here we have like more layers than we got to do with If Found probably. This is how it ends, where there's like writing from different periods. I think with If Found we were just trying to get through the whole story, so we didn't go back over as many sections. 40 days left. Yeah, there was more of an explicit countdown also.
Yeah.
But,
I sometimes wonder in the finished version of If Found if people like pick up on the like implicit tension of the New Year's Eve thing.
Which tension specifically?
Just that sense of like that this is kind of a countdown to the end of the month.
Oh, okay. So here you can see that kind of raises. Like those systems we had before were also a bit like dodgier. But here you can see we're actually going to jump to like this different scene. There's like, you saw a cutaway there that's like kind of showing some behind the scenes stuff a little bit. Like the edges are a bit less polished. But this is nice. You're raising like underneath the character rather than the character themselves. That kid hasn't moved. Yeah, I am really fond of this. It is kind of like a different game. He saw me, don't look at him. So you're erasing, and then when you find something, you'll zoom into it. Oh, hi. Hey, I saw you sitting over there. Are you spying on me? So the very first character we drew was Chance, and like his design, I think it changed quite a bit, you know, but some things definitely stayed the same. I don't think we were allowed to have this symbol in the final game. But like his fluffy jackets and big shoes and stuff.
Got style.
Yeah. At this point, like, also, I think it's worth, like, adding, like, you know, like, we do have, our game is, you know, it's a big trans, big gay game, but we didn't even know it when we were doing this, you know? I guess, like, I guess Cassio probably wasn't sure of her feelings for other people, but, like, if this was an anti-dating sim, it was kind of like a, you know, it was, like, het. What do you listen to? So here you can see, like, it's all a bit scrappier, and it doesn't really have the kind of composed scenes that If Found eventually, you know, has. But there's, like, a nice, like, kind of joy to its unpolishedness. And I think the different color text is supposed to be the different two characters. So Cassio was asking, how do you find this stuff? So as they're listening to the K-pop, Leah was dying when we added K-pop. She was much too embarrassed lest anyone think Cassio was her, or it was her idea to add K-pop in. But I was just like, hey, you draw cool K-pop characters. And it wasn't set in 1993 at this point. Here, look at this old little sketch.
It's also like, I think there was a slightly different tenor to K-pop fandom in like 2015, 2016. It hadn't quite got as big.
It was not as big, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's wild how fast these things change.
But there's also a different tenor to the game, you know. I think it's definitely, it's a lot lighter and it's a lot less it's less sure of itself. So Chance is already crushing on Cassio though.
Yeah, and the dialogue is really good.
Cassio's a bit oblivious. I think this was all written like kind of stream of consciousness mostly. One day. I think it was like tweaked, but it was like mostly written in like a stream of consciousness hour. back in Fumbly, which is where my original desk was. So here, this is like a really cool thing that we see a little bit in the gig, but nowhere else, where we return to something we saw previously. And this is actually the exact same scene earlier. The only difference is these like erases were added so people would not think the demo was over and realize, oh wait, there's something behind here. Can I erase this now? So you erase the book. And the music changes here also. It's really nice. It starts like this kind of like backwards-y music. And then the Mac stays. Yeah?
If I remember correctly, when we took it to EGX
in London,
this bit was still a sticking point for people. Like they would get even though we put in the erases, they would still get stuck there. I love this bit.
So then this bit here is like an effect you see a couple times in the game. I think it's very unexpected here, but instead of erasing, you're kind of adding in scribbles, which is really neat. And then finally, I still can't erase Mac's name. I erase Mac, erase all the writing, and now I can erase the name. And here we see, this looks like it's a bit stretched actually. If on, please return. Coming soon. And it's kind of nice. Here you can see like the eraser is very, like the frost makes it look a bit softer, but it's like literally, it's very harsh. Yeah, we changed like the erasing, like how the erasing works. It changed a bit since this version. There was like a last bit. It's not in here where we would see. Oh, there was a last one where we'd see Cassio floating in space. Unless we erased through that. I think we might have erased through that. So hey, that was the old demo. It was really good. Like, I think that was, it really had a character. I tried to have, even though this was just like, oh hello, it's Cassio, oh hello, it's Chance, you know, the characters don't really do anything. I tried to have the idea of structure by coming back to the diary again, you know, but it wasn't fully developed because this wasn't a full game yet. And actually, following that demo, we did take some time off from working on it, like I would say. We started a lot of other projects, which you can see lots of cool art from here. And here's an early version if I found. But here's like two other projects. This is a spooky game, and then this was kind of like an interpersonal game. And then Leah is doing all of this art. Although I think like Aiden Wall might have done this composition with the characters. But we kind of got scared off from working on It Found. We had basically all these ideas of what we wanted to do with it, but it was too big, and we wanted to make a small game, get some money, because still we were struggling with this thing, like how do we work on something full time, you know, how do we get that money? What were your thoughts at this time?
I mean, this was like a point, I think, where we were kind of like, we had intersected, and I had worked with you guys for a bit, and then for various reasons of my own, mostly health reasons, I had kind of stepped away. And it's that thing of like, right, like to commit to a project, you need time, you need resources, and you need money, and it's just, without that, you do end up, I think, kind of floundering, or like trying to figure out. I think it can be very hard to figure out what the best use of your resources is when
and we were planning
you don't have that support.
We were planning for Kickstarters and all kinds of things, which like I would be so scared of doing that, you know, because you're promising a game that's so far out, and even seeing like how If I'm developed over its course, like it changed so radically, you know, you have no idea what the game is so close to the start. But yeah, you're totally right, like we just didn't have the ability to pay literally for you to like keep working with us. I still, you know, had some money, and like Leah, you know, was still working on that, but I'm pretty sure like, you know, she had her own like side projects and stuff at the same time. I think this was a mistake, you know. I think we could have kept working on It Found, but you know, it was exciting to start something new. But then at the end of 2016 was when we won a big Irish award, the Irish Design Awards, and it was the first time video games were ever included. And funny, actually, Curtin won a Writers Guild of Ireland award as well. The previous year, it was the first time games were included with that. But it was the first time like games were included in the Design Awards, and we like, it kind of swept the board, you know, it won Best Newcomer, Best Overall, all these kind of things. And it was just like, oh, wow, this, like, really does resonate with people. And, yeah, there's something special here. So, like, yeah, maybe we should stick with it. And actually, then, this is where Annapurna comes in. So, I got another kind of scholarship to go to GDC in 2017. And this was a scholarship for people with the IGDA, people who've been in the industry for a while, you know, maybe they're trans like myself, or maybe they're like, you know, black, or like, you know, different kind of like more marginalized backgrounds than typically what video game developers are made up of. So people that had experience, and it was kind of giving them like another kind of connections and another kind of like teaching and stuff. And it was mostly like, honestly, you know, meeting the people through that, and obviously the, you know, the ability to travel to GDC helped a lot. So on a wing and a prayer, while we were there, I was like, oh sure, while I'm in GDC, I will pitch to a bunch of publishers, and we talked to a bunch of them, and Annapurna was one of those. And Annapurna, like from the off, were the most excited and the most friendly. They had actually seen the teaser that we had put out like probably the year before. So some of the developers, some of the publishing team in Annapurna, and they're quite small, but they're, you know, they're very clued in on the indie game sphere. So they had like heard of the game, but it was them playing it, you know, and they were like, oh wow, you know, like this is mature storytelling. It has this unique mechanic. You know, it has a unique art style. It's like hitting all these points. It just felt the perfect match for them. At the time, they had just announced, you know, I'm not sure that Edith Finch had even come out at this point, you know, maybe it just had, you know, but they had just announced themselves like a few months prior, and they were kind of the new kids on the block at the point. And yeah, like basically all of 2017 was negotiating with them while I still like teached, and while unfortunately we worked on other games like Fools, but I mean it's good because like we're like picking up some of those projects now, so you know it all comes around. And at the start I think probably we still scoped the game too big, you know, and I think we probably should have been clearer on what they wanted to see from us, you know. So that's like one thing we learned was, yeah, having that vision the whole way through. And working with them, you know, it was really good. You know, they were just so supportive the whole time. They were always, yeah, very supportive. And yeah, they really saw us through to release. So we started with them in 2018, and then obviously the game came out in 2020. The first step in our process was getting a coder. You know, like obviously, you know, my background is in programming, but it's not what excites me. There are some developers who can do everything, but you know, that's like a certain kind of game, and it's also, those people are demons. So, you know, we were lucky to hire Tim. Like honestly, I knew just like, you know, from talking to him, and he was just so honest, and he just had so like, he was just so focused on the work itself, you know, and he kind of wanted to work in a more kind of like worker focused place, I would say. You know, he wanted to you know, I mean, this is the challenge, and this is why I got that scholarship to GDC, is that like people with experience, you know, it's like you can put up with like tough game development situations for a few years, you know, if you're lucky. Like I have MS, and you know, that is one thing that makes it harder to do that, you know. But after a few years, like even the most healthy and like strong-minded people will start to burn out. So he if he was going to stay in games, wanted a change of pace, and I think, you know, it worked out really well for both of us. So actually, I think this is probably a good moment to talk about some of the tech stuff. So our first like step was taking the old demo and updating the tool such that A, we could navigate the scenes quickly and build them out quickly, and then 2, how we develop and design the areas and the levels could work as well. And like basically, you know, if you can make a tool to make something faster to do, that's just gonna be, you know, it's gonna like save you so much work. So for anyone who's not familiar, in Unity you have kind of a list of all your objects that are in the scene. You have a view of your scene. You have your game window, which is what the end result will look like, and then you have project windows and like inspectors and things like this. This is all the Unity default stuff. But then on top of it, we've coded our own tool called the workflow tools, which let us move through it. So first of all, here you can see all the different parts of our scene. So in if found, basically the game is split up into pages. So this is a page, this is a page, this is a page, this is a page. You can see they're all very different in space, but then inside each page you can go forward in depth. So that's an erase layer, that's an erase layer, that's an erase layer, that's an art attack. Yeah, so like here you can see like things disappearing as we go through it. And then we can go sideways to another one. And as you go in, you can still see we have the zoomies. So like things get really small. You can see them getting tiny there. And we can zoom all the way in here. Because players don't have direct control over it, it's not as obvious anymore, but it's still in there. But yeah, these tools let us, this tells us the size of the camera and lets us move through the scenes like sideways and forwards, like really nicely. Back to 0. Here you can see lots of kind of boxes and stuff as well. Let me take like a diary for like how the erasing works would be a good example. So here we go. This yellow box here is like the size of the camera, so you can see it here. And the shaded portion is like an iPad, like 3x2. Then we created tools for, what needs to be erased. So you can see these scribbles. You need to like, erase all these boxes. Not completely, but just like touch them. And we went through lots of iterations. Like we came up with a system so we could like remember what's being erased versus not. So it could all be loaded. Because we really wanted to be able to jump straight back into the game. But here, if I hit 2, actually, you can see how, this is kind of neat. Yeah, you can see how all of this is actually like in 3D in layers. That's kind of cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And yeah, you can see how like, the zoom is just wild. But then here we have things where we can add text, we can add, this is like a thing that will trigger stuff, add materials, add images. There's just like loads of tools. Here's lots of like little debug things. And then here's like this also has like loads of tools. This is like a real behind the scenes. So once you hit the blue boxes, it will like trigger basically the next ones because that's been erased. Here on the right, you're like, where did everything go? So we'll pull it out. And here we're probably using Unity how it's probably not supposed to be used, which is like deep list. But honestly, it actually made a lot of sense for us. Where if I select, let me go back to 0. But yeah, like everything's kind of like embedded within itself. So like layer 0 is this one. Layer 1 is this one. Layer 2 is this one. And basically the order in which these things are in the layer show the order they are in the art. So if I put I've selected now this kind of like wall and gate and stuff, I can put it underneath like the sky, for example, and yeah, you can see it all kind of almost disappears. And then we have like nice things where we can recolor. This is one of my favorite ones. Like we made it like a little shader where you can change the color of something like really quickly, so we wouldn't have to mess in with Photoshop or anything like that. So we can not only change the color of the fill, but also the line color, which is really nice. And essentially like how I found was made was by making these little compositions, within each other, and yeah, just building it out. So it actually got quite fun. We got to, I would say, well, we'll talk about this a little bit in a bit, but mid 2019 was when we were really building out all like the scenes, and it got furiously fast by the end of 2019. But yeah. Is there anything else on this you think I should point out, Eve?
You've covered everything pretty well.
So, I mean, this is...
Unless you want to show fungus.
Yeah, so I can show fungus. That's like how things are scripted. So yeah, that's our layouts. So this is all like, the art and stuff. We have like a manager scene, which, so there's like 2 scenes. Like there's the scene you're in, and then there's a manager scene, which is like things that happen in every scene. So just like you need a pause menu, you know, it needs to be able to work, and you know, here's some like debug functions. And yeah, the flowchart is our scripting language. So I'll open up Fungus. So Fungus is a tool that was developed by some Irish developers actually. Open flowchart window. And is this the right one? Yeah, here we go. And it was developed by Irish developers for making like adventure kind of games. And it came out like I say late 2013. I started using it in 2014, first with Curtain, you know, very hacked. And then it got like some more big updates, maybe 2015, maybe 2016. I think 2015 might have been the last ones. And since then, the developers have gone on to, you know, develop, you know, scripting kind of tools for Romero games, and even like, you know, they're like some of the lead programmers on Empire of Sin by Romero Games, like Ireland's first big, I would say, AAA game, which is cool. But what Fungus allows you to do is you can set up basically loads of commands that happen in order. So when we go to the phone booth scene, you know, it's going to disable erasing for a second because it's a cutscene kind of. And we want to get like some lines of dialogue. It's going to like wait commands and all this kind of stuff. There's like if for Switch there's like a rumble. And we set like the post-processing here. And the post-processing is like something that takes the final image and like tweaks all the colors and that kind of thing, you know. So if we play it, like actually we can probably even see it. So here's phone booth. So I'll have that open and we'll play it. We'll see you go through these different things. And here you can see, here's all the different commands. Like for a new game, we've moved on from Fungus, but yeah, Fungus, you know, like did us well for a long time. I got a lot of use out of it. It's probably one of the big missing parts of Unity is having a kind of scripting language, you know, rather than just writing actual code. Which isn't really, I mean, you can't do that, but it isn't always the most effective way to do things. Okay, so let me see. Phone booth. So here we can see, it already went through all those ones. And we can see I think the hue color is going to be changing over the next while. Here it makes like that whole transparent thing. It's stuck on hello until I click play. Hello, hello. So good to hear you. And there's loads of them. Like it's all the audio stuff that Ellie added in. So yeah, I mean this is a nice like behind the scenes of it. Like at least of where Ifan ended up, you know. It's a lot of, you know, always it's a question of like, oh, if you were to make this game like from start, like now that you know exactly what the game is, exactly what the tools you need, it would be like a cinch. But it's like the process of developing all this, which is really cool. Here's like all the different characters that are talking in this scene, I guess. The different positions of where dialogue would happen. Okay, I mean we're getting really into the weeds here. But I mean the main thing I wanted to show is like the zooming and like, you know, moving through the layers because I think that's cool. Here you can see like a big chunky piece of art that's like, I don't even know where that is from.
It's a good question. But yeah, it's a great summary. And I mean, as you said, like this doesn't cover, there were intermediate iterations on a lot of this stuff that
you can see the effects
then changed.
Yeah, and this isn't color also. There is like, I'll talk about it more just generally, but like the mechanics at the end, which is their whole own thing. But here you can see like this is also another like shader where it's like getting distorted over time, you know. And probably like you can see this
one
is
of
like
the lessons of If Found is definitely like you can do a lot with shader.
Yeah, If Found is generally like made out of, I mean I think in general the layers like they were probably done by me and you, and then Bree and Brogan also did like a number of them. And Leah sometimes would do like a layer, but it was mostly like creating lots of art, you know. So it was kind of like an experimentation little process, which was fun. Okay, so let's jump back through and like finish off this talk. So that was the tools side of thing. We had to get it all to work and work on all the different platforms. And then here was like the big kind of like turn in the game project, I would say, was moving from what you saw in that original demo where you have free movement to what If Found now is, which is more of a visual novel, you know, kind of thing. And, you know, this came by because basically it was like you needed to be an octopus to play the game at one point, you know? And it was also like we had to choose whether we wanted to like, you know, focus on the story for release or focus on mechanics, you know? We were taking a while to develop the game. But yeah, we just thought the mechanics were too complicated and it was too messy. And specifically the zooming and the free control. Like, people making the game would find it difficult to make. And then if we're thinking about bringing this to iOS or bringing it to Switch, you know, it's like, how are we going to do that? So, yeah, we kind of just dropped the free movement, you know. We brought it back in certain small sections to kind of break it up, you know, but we, like, also brought in the dialogue boxes, which weren't there originally, to break up the dialogue as well, which is here. It's just one of the first, like, scenes of it, which is cool. So, yeah, it's like sometimes, you know, you gotta focus on what's the important thing. And for F5, it was the erasing, you know, and it was Cassio's journey. And so, like, all those mechanics you don't get to use, you know, you can use them in something else, is usually how it goes. So, Challenge 3 was, the story hadn't come together yet, you know, we'd worked on the game, like 9 months or something, and we had lots of cool chapters, you know, we had a gig chapter, we had a snowy chapter, but they didn't really gel together, and we kind of still had this, this is still only like a sixth of what we want to do, you know? We had all these kind of individual chapters that were quite nice, but it wasn't like a full game. So, yeah, I think this is where you came in, and also, like, Claire Brankin at the time, who helped with, you know, adding, like, Claire Brankin came in, and we talked about the family came into it, and it became a lot more personal. But this is where Jack and Colin, first of all, were kind of like, because each character would only be in it for a chapter. You have a chapter with Shant, a chapter with another character, etc. We needed 2 characters who'd be there the whole time, and that became Colin and Jack, who were also like this older gay couple. You know, like, I mean, not even older, but like older in LGBT terms, where they've been there before you. You know, and it was someone that Katsu could look up to. Here we have the black hole in the background. But it still wasn't really there, you know? It wasn't really good enough. I mean, what was your, like, thoughts on the game at that point?
Yeah, when I came back on, well, I say back on, but really it was kind of also coming in for the first time. It was the end of 2018. And like you said, like, there were lots of cool parts to the game, but I do remember also that I was kind of, like, floundering, trying to figure out, like, who the characters were still a little bit, and like what their dynamics with each other were, and like what they were all building towards, which I think was something that we had a lot of conversations about.
And I think then over this next like 6 months is really when it started to click, and then the final like 9 months was just like cranking out content. In 2019, like the start of it, like yourself joined, Bree joined, which was like a great, like up until this point, almost entirely, not completely, but like Leah was doing all the art, you know, and Bree was someone who had games experience and more technical experience and could bridge the gap between Tim and Leah. And you should look Bree Chu, like Nosferatu, like Nosferatu, but with a Chu at the end. On Twitter, and they're a really awesome artist, and you should follow them and hire them. They're not working with us at the moment for our current project, but you know, we'd definitely love to work with them again. Brogan Hackett came on. Brogan's like a great Irish indie, and then like our 2 new music people, Tumelo and Ellie. And then for the game itself, like the big thing was going deep on the characters rather than going wide. So we cut down the number of characters to like literally we just Cassio and Chance. What are their journeys? And like even just Cassio, and then like why is Cassio wanting to raise like the world and everything? It's like, she is like dissociating from reality, you know, and then also she's having these issues with her family, and at that point it was kind of like a headcanon, or like I was like, okay, Cassio's trans, but it's not going to really come into the story, you know. But we moved it to Ackle, you know, and that was like really the clincher. We moved from our like made up kind of YA kind of island, which was a kind of a mythical island off Sligo and Donegal, I think, or off Mayo. I mean, like it was kind of based on Ackle anyway, but we were too scared to say Ackle, and they were like, okay, like let's just go for it. And I remember Leah was scared to do that, but then like, you know, literally a day later we forgot that we were scared, and it was just like how it was. And now we could start like scouting real locations, you know, thinking about like how they lived their lives, the schools they went to, and we just really embraced it being more personal. Cassio's mom became such a big thing, and like her brother later, and and then all that led kind of like we had to put together a teaser, which was one of those good things when you have a publisher is like, you guys got to ship this game, we got to announce it. Yeah. So in August, I think the end of August 2019, we put out the trailer, and it really conveyed the vibes and everything we were going for. And I think at that point, like, mechanics were kind of locked. I think like art wise, like we still had kind of like some effects that didn't end up in the final game. We went with different effects, but it was, I think, like, If Found started to be what If Found was, and then finally, so the eraser mechanic has gone on this journey, and it's like changed formats and styles, but the big thing was still, where is this story going? And there was always the end of the world, and then what it became was Cassio erasing herself, and there's even a nice moment where the eraser kind of like controls itself. But we always had in the back of our minds, we wanted to have, like, I wanted to have like almost an RPG at the end where you had loads of choices, because the game presents you with so few choices, because this is Cassio's experience, she doesn't see the choices that she has, I guess, so she doesn't feel she has choices. I wanted the ending to be like a complete rejection of that, and we had Charlene Putney, who's a great writer, and she worked on Divinity Original Sin 2, so we had like a big famous RPG writer working on an RPG with us, which would be the ending, but it all just felt like a bit random. So we kind of mixed both. We kind of had like the spacey elements, but we also just had the characters into the future, and I think seeing the characters into the future is such a hopeful thing, you wouldn't even like realize it. And like these mechanics all came in like quite late, like the end of 2019, start of 2020. We were developing these last mechanics, and even the character creator was like the very last thing. We did not tell Annapurna, we just snuck it in. But it's so brilliant. It's like the best. It's the best part. It's like, it's like waking up from like sleep and being like, the game has to have a character creator, and then like putting it in. So it's like, that's when things are like going well. What are your feelings on the ending?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's so good. It's interesting, like, how we got there. Mm-hmm. I think if there's like one lesson I take away from the process of like getting through If Found, it's like all of the stuff that scared us or that we were nervous about ended up being the best and most rewarding stuff.
Okay. Like the ending and stuff, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think, especially in terms of like the more, like, particularly thinking about like the, Cassio being trans, setting it on Akil, like really diving into the characters was scary, but it was really good. And the more like direct and honest we got with that, the better it got. And that was also really where the ending came from, was I think like a desire to be very, honest about the potential futures of these characters, right? Like not wanting to leave it on a note that felt like overly gloomy or depressing.
Well, we really wanted, even though like, okay, like If Found had always set out to be a game that ended with the end of the world, especially like we never wanted it to be a hopeless game, but now especially that it was also a trans game, which it didn't start out as. We did not want to have a sad trans ending, like we had like discussions on whether Cassio's mom or like Maggie or who would be there for her, and I think like I went a more personal direction, and I felt like it was really the mom's journey a little bit. Although I did like we put in that extra piece of art later where it's like Maggie and Colin are at the door when Breach embraces her kid, and the message for me with that was just like, you can't really convince people off like treating you with humanity, it's kind of just something that has to, you can't convince them rationally, kind of just has to come from them. But with the mechanics, it was really like payoff for all the time you've spent erasing and all that kind of stuff, and like giving that twist, like we talked about way back ago. It's like presenting the diary not just as, it's like seeing it from another angle, so it's not just this thing that holds all your secrets that you want to get rid of, but it's also something that holds your future, which was really cool. So we wanted to have hope, and that was like best encapsulated with the character, that really worked. So we got to the end. Here you can see our Metacritic score from the 88. Very nice. My birth year. It's on Switch here. And like, you know, I think another thing that really helped is I think that's probably 2019, we kind of moved to a 4-day week, you know, and I think we were able to work faster and better and like more productively because we weren't like just burnt out constantly. And I think even with like being like, you know, we were behind where we wanted to be with finishing the game, you know, and we were like, oh, the game really should have come out a couple months ago, whatever, you know, really trying to like, this is the last night we could possibly hit, and we were really trying to hit that, but I don't think we crunched, you know, we had deadlines and we had weeks where we did like work more and work late, but we did try to take breaks after those to recover, and I think that helped. I mean, I'm the director, so I can't really say that, you know, so like you as like
yeah, I think there were some really stressful weeks, but they were always just stressful weeks. Like we never had a stressful month. Maybe the last month was kind of stressful overall, but like that's inevitable, right?
Yeah, we had,
even if everything had been done.
I think what I was proud of was just making people take breaks after we did have a late night stressful thing, you know.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons why the end was stressful was because of COVID, you know. Our video was now demonetized by Steam. Because of COVID, like specifically testing the game at the end with doing that remotely with a testing company was very difficult because they had never done it before either, and we also all got sick for a month, which was very fun when you're doing all these things at the end. So we did have like a little breathing room afterwards to make the Switch version and like, you know, start preparing our next game. Which was nice, and we got to like fix a couple things. Although there's still a few parts of the narrative I think are kind of like not clear enough to players, which I would like the director's cut a little bit. I think probably Cassio Mom gets the drawing, you know, and I think it wasn't clear this is the same piece of paper that they had previously, so I would make that clearer. I was trying to keep the surprise of what it was, but I think people just didn't realize that they'd done anything. And also like maybe the relationship between Mac and Cassio's mom and stuff could have been established more.
Honestly, like director's cut version, I'd be so tempted to go in and like stick that childhood drawing into the diary, like put some sellotape on it, like put it into the diary, because like you said, like people just it's the one thing that I really think people don't make that connection.
I'd also like to add like more free movement sections, you know. I think the interesting thing, like getting to the end of this, is that, you know, the product is the result of the time that goes into making it, you know, and it's kind of like a memento of that time as well. And I think that's really awesome. You know, this game was shaped by like all the different directions, but we didn't set out with an exact plan, you know, and there's going to be bits and pieces that you miss, and there's going to be choices. You know, we did choose to focus on the narrative over necessarily, you know, if the narrative was shorter, the mechanic probably would have been like fresher for longer, you know. But I think that's kind of the great thing about games and stuff as well, and all kinds of media, is that it is imperfect. And like for me, like it was just like okay, whatever about reviews, the most important thing was just like people's reactions, you know. The one thing that really surprised me was just how much this game made people cry. I just didn't even think of that, you know. Like I cried a couple times during development, but that was probably more when the game was closer to done. Although some of it was when we were writing those scenes as well. But yeah, I just can't believe that like had that effect on people. It was wild. Yeah. Our secret agenda. But yeah, like for us it was like huge, you know, like your first like game, you know, well, it's not necessarily my first game. I've made like 100. Over 100. It's like the first like big commercial thing as a studio, you know. It's like it just makes it easier from here to go on to our next thing. So in summation, and here you can see the journey. Here's like one of the very first pieces of Cassio to one of the very last pieces of Cassiopeia, and here's one of the last pieces of Cassio, and here's another one, which is just Chance and Cassio running. This one's really neat.
So good.
So what were we talking about? Yeah, this whole big chat, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there was enough interesting bits and pieces in here. But so you can see the evolution of the erasing, from the early version in college, where it was like pre-made assets that just cut a single time, to the original versions of If Found, where you were drawing polygons basically and the polygons cut through, to all we have now. It's like series of textures with all kinds of filters and magic on them, and then also making that work. That version in the demo, like, what you can erase is determined by the level of zoom you are at, which is very finicky. Whereas now it's determined by have you erased something or not, you know? And there's like one or two like places where, someone got stuck, you know, and we probably could have, like, with a bit more, like, you know, time, we could catch those, but they're all fixable, which is great. And then the game structure, which is like actually not just having an idea and like, here's all the events, but how is this a journey, you know? How does Casio, you know, how does her relationship evolve, both with the band, you know, and with Chance in particular, which is like a harsh one, but it's also ultimately nice when they're friends at the end, because we don't want everyone just to be like, and they're a couple, and it was like, yay. It's nice that they're just friends, but they're like real good, like, life friends, you know. But also the mechanics, you know, and like seeing this erasing, it changes up a little bit, but mostly at the end you see like this whole other thing. And then finally, like, you know, the team, going from my work in Scotland, where I felt isolated, and so I came back to Ireland and made myself isolated, where like, I can only make interesting games solo, to actually we've built a really cool team and we all support each other, and it's just been nice, and it's just like, ready to work on the next one. This is how If Found was finished. All of us. Yeah, it's a big enough team. And then it was there's lots of people that contributed bits and pieces, you know, throughout, that really add to it. And then next time, this is the point I was going to show a teaser of what we're working on. But I thought everything was way too spoilery, so here's some robots. They're cool robots. They're like breakdancing Doctor Who robots. But yeah, like going into the next game, like we've been working on it, like I probably shouldn't say how long we've been working on it, like I guess it's only like 6 months really, like 5 months, like since the Switch version was done, like we're working on it full time from the start, which is good. It does mean we have less like material to build off going straight in, unlike with If Found, where we already had like a really good demo. But we still have lots of things we worked on in the past to pull from, but the main thing is we have the team, you know. We finished a nice demo in January, but we shouldn't talk too much about it.
No.
So, yeah, we still love experimentation, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, the most important thing is the team, getting on well with everybody.
Yeah.
And also, like you said, like, respecting everybody, treating each other well. You know, like, you only end up damaging yourself in the project if you, like, I don't know, if you, like, punish other people and like, not you specifically.
I know, but
you
like,
never do that.
But also, like, you know, I think like it's very easy as a small developer to get fixated on like burning yourself to death, you know, to work really hard for something. But the thing is, like, if you achieve that, you know, then you're gonna be like, okay, what now? I gotta burn myself to death again, and you're probably not gonna be able to. You'll probably be like too burnt out. Whereas like my focus with Dreamfields, I really want to, like, you know, build something that is like week in, week out, we're working just at like a good sustainable pace, and it is enjoyable, you know, because this is our lives, you know. Game developers are people too, and like I would definitely like to see a future for game development where, because I mean, like in film, it's like depending on your role, it's like 3 months of really hard work, and then you're like got a break before you get the next project. But in game development, there's no kind of like break except, you mass layoffs, which just isn't very good because they're not paid for that. So I would like to see a future definitely where, it's all a lot more sustainable, and we're not just taking in like young people, burning the market, and a new crop of young people, and then like a small sliver of middle management, you know, staying along.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also I just want to see more cool and strange games, you know. So hopefully we can develop some of those. You know, we're gonna we'll make something really different next time, but it's still gonna be experimental, still gonna be like narrative. Maybe not always narrative, but next time it is anyway. Cool. Any last thoughts, Eve?
No, I think you said everything.
Woo! Wow, this was like a big long talk. If you got to the end, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Like, this is why we do this. Like, okay, it's nice to do this for like the festival and stuff, but really we do this because like yeah, like we have an audience now, we have fans, you know. So I hope people like it. So
yeah,
take care, be well.
Thanks everyone,
and we'll see you in the future. Bye.
Yeah, bye.